Welcome to another episode of the Trees and Lines podcast. On this episode, we talk with Elvy Barton, Water and Forest Sustainability Senior Manager at Salt River Project. We talk with Elvy about the challenges she faces with her water and forest restoration efforts, how she collaborates with the Forest Service, various states, and other stakeholders to help restoration efforts. Have a listen. Hope you enjoy. Elvy, what a pleasure to have you join us on the Trees and Lines podcast. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you for having me today.
Yeah. So, Elvy, we usually start off by asking you to sort of tell us about yourself and tell us about your position there at the Salt River Project, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. So I lead a team that is focused on forest health and water conservation. And today we're really going to focus in on the forest health aspect. And in that aspect, we have a team that works with a great deal of partners and looking at how we can scale a forest restoration to achieve landscape scale restoration objectives here in Arizona.
Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in this field. How did you get to where you are today?
So I'm going to take you way back in the day. So when I was younger, my dad worked for the U.S. Forest Service, and we were always out and about, running around the forest, running in the streams, and I just had a love of nature and a deep appreciation between the links of forest and water. But there really actually was one defining moment where I knew that I really wanted to work on forest restoration issues. And that was in June of 2013, where here in Arizona, we lost 19 firefighters in a Yarnell Hill wildfire. And that day was the day that I decided that I was going to be a part of the solution, and that I was really going to dedicate a big portion of my career to making progress. Because to me, losing 19 firefighters to something that we know what the solution is and we have ways to solve the problem, it wasn't okay with me. So, and that's kind of the drive that I take with me and I bring to my team every day to, try to keep moving forward and making great progress.
So at Salt River, there's the electric side, and are they separate organizations, or how does that work?
Salt River Project is a really unique organization. We have a power side and a water side. And so our history is really based in the water side, where in the late 1800s, there was a lot of floods that were being experienced and then droughts here in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And the farmers that were here collectively pooled together their lands and put it up for collateral to leverage against the federal government to bring funding to build dam infrastructure. So, and that's kind of where our roots began. We started out as a Bureau of Reclamation project, running dams and reservoirs to serve the valley with water supplies. A few decades later in our history, the power side came about, and that was really to help generate electricity for kind of like the growing, I would say, area and some of our industrial areas. And that side of the organization is probably like the big part now that you can think about it, but our roots are really in water.
I read your article in T&D World magazine a while back now, I guess. Your company's making quite the investment in watershed management, or forest management in general. And I'm not sure I'm running into that at other companies. So can you tell us a little bit about that investment?
Yeah, so I'm going to take you visually up into the watershed. So the water that we deliver to our customers here in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and we serve about 2.5 million customers, the water really derives from 3 watersheds across 8.3 million acres. So if you're thinking about Arizona, our watersheds stretch up almost towards the Grand Canyon and then all the way over to the New Mexico border. And it's a very vast area that includes a lot of federal land, state, private, tribal land. But a big portion of it is actually forested lands that are held by the U.S. Forest Service. And one of the biggest threats to SRP delivering on its mission to provide reliable, affordable, and sustainable water supplies is the threat of catastrophic wildfire. And so, since about 2002, we have experienced 7 megafires across these watersheds, and those megafires are fires that are over 100,000 acres each, which are outside of like the historical norms for these ecosystems, and they have really, really devastating impacts. They not only impact communities and people and their livelihoods. They impact our critical infrastructure, whether it's on the power or the water side, but it also impacts our water supplies. So all the ash and debris from these fires end up in the water supply, and then it also builds up behind our dams, which ultimately reduces our ability to store long-term water supplies. And we live in a desert. That's our lifeblood here. So that was like the motivation, like that's the why. And the how is our board and council took an amazing leadership step in 2019 to come up with a forest health goal. And today that goal is to help thin 800,000 acres by 2035. And so that is our North Star and kind of our why of why we have this amazing team to do all this great work.
How big is your team, Elvy?
So I have a team. I have a mighty team of 5 individuals, 3 that work on the forest restoration side, and 2 that work on the water conservation side. But I am also armed with a really amazing support system throughout SRP with our communications group. We have like a whole cartographic group. Lots of lawyers that help us through these things. So we have a lot of great people throughout SRP that also support our group.
Do you guys have, because you manage the water and the trees, right? And so on the tree side, do you guys have like a traditional sort of vegetation management or forest structure, right? Where you have a clearing program or you have some type of system to manage your right-of-ways? Like how are you set up to solve the forest management side of things?
A really interesting thing about SRP, most of our distribution system actually lies in the Phoenix metropolitan area. So there's not really a lot of forced distribution side connectivity. We do have some large transmission lines that do run through the National Forest System land, so Forest Service, of which we have rights of ways that we do maintain through a vegetative management aspect. And so we have the whole team on the power side that works on those.
Got it.
And what's a little bit different is that my team, we sit on the water side of the company, and we are more focused on like the voluntary actions around restoration treatments and thinning that complement all of the vegetative management actions that are occurring on our rights of ways.
So when you say volunteer, can you explain that a little bit? So
Yeah.
So it sounds like your role is like water is my priority, trees and the health of those trees, impact my world, right? There's another group that's focused on the heavy lifting and management of those right-of-ways. But when you say voluntary, what exactly do you mean in terms of how you interface with those groups?
Yeah, so our group is really an external focused group. So since we're not the land managers, we don't have any rights of ways. that we are working on in our group, we really work with partners. So our partnerships primarily rely using the U.S. Forest Service and the Arizona State Department of Forestry and Fire Management. And we use an authority called Good Neighbor Authority, which allows for the state foresters department to partner with the Forest Service and to take actions on Forest Service land. And so SRP comes into that partnership as kind of like a collaborator and a funding mechanism for all the work that needs to get done out there. And so it's kind of this three-party relationship where we evaluate across the landscape of like, what are each of our priorities? Like, we want to protect communities, we want to protect infrastructure, we want to protect water, and where are the most at-risk areas across these watersheds in terms of wildfire risk? And so we come together and we evaluate those areas, and we come up with projects that we all collectively agree upon. And then we have a unique funding model where the Forest Service provides 50% of our funding, and then SRP and all of our other partners come together and provide the other 50% of the funding. And so we're allowed that through that mechanism, we actually can go do thousands of acres worth of projects every single year.
Oh, that's very cool. Very different.
How do you bring in those other groups? I assume they're commercial.
We actually have federal, state, local government, nonprofit, and corporate partners. And I think what we could do is kind of maybe dissect some of those segments and just kind of give some examples. So when we're talking to local governments, so cities and counties, we really try to impress upon them about why we need them at the table. And how it's really important that they also invest in this type of work because it's protecting their communities, it's protecting their citizens, it's protecting the water that their citizens drink every day, it's protecting the power that comes into their homes, their businesses, their schools. And so I think that we make the press upon them that, like, we need you at the table. And it's not necessarily, I always tell them, about how much funding you're bringing to the table, but the fact that you're sitting on this side of the table with us. That's what's most important. So that's kind of one example. And then the other example I really like to share is we have a program really aimed at corporate customers. So large international organizations. So this just past year, we've been able to secure funding from PepsiCo, Google, Meta, EdgeCore, and Apple. And we really came at it from a unique way where each of those organizations are really focused on water sustainability goals. And through our forest restoration work, we can demonstrate and quantify how thinning trees actually increases water in those local ecosystems through increased soil moisture and increased stream flow. And so we can quantify that for them, and for their investments in this work, we can say, you helped restore this much water in this local ecosystem. And so that's been a really great partnership effort.
Those targeted corporates, is that also because they have some type of like business interest in the state, or is this because you've aligned more with, again, their water initiatives, right? Like, why did you specifically target those companies?
Yeah, so the reason we specifically targeted those customers is they are our power and sometimes our water customers as well. So we have a relationship with them already, but it's really important for them to know that we are working together to protect their water supply. So they have water for their facilities, for their products that they're making. And so it's really a great opportunity to reduce risks to them as well.
Do you collaborate with other states that have similar watershed footprints, or I mean, obviously it's a little bit different because you guys are desert and there's not, there's only a handful of you, I guess. But like Oregon comes to mind, a lot of run of the river projects and dam controlled power and et cetera, et cetera. So, what's your like out of state collaboration look like?
Oh my gosh, I love out of state collaborations. I love working with other utilities. That's one of my favorite things
Okay.
to do. So last year, we actually were able to bring together 10 Western water utilities.
Okay.
And all across, from like Oregon all the way over to New Mexico to come together and understand like where are you in your restoration journey, like what is the scale of your watersheds, what's the scale of the risk you're facing, are you investing now, and if you are, how are you doing that, like are you partnering directly with the Forest Service, are you working through nonprofits, and it was really fascinating to hear where everybody is in their journey. And there's lots that are just starting out, and there are some that are, down their pathway, kind of like SRP. But I think one of the great things that I heard was that we all have very similar stories. All of our water supplies, or a big majority of our water supplies, are off of National Forest System lands, headwaters. And those headwaters are at risk for catastrophic wildfire, or they have seen catastrophic wildfire, and it's impacting their infrastructure, their people, and their water supplies. And so we have a similar vein together that unites us. We just kind of, it was great to share different strategies on how we're trying to tackle this problem Western wide.
Interesting. Oh,
So I assume there must be an education component to this, because outside of the forest manager and the watershed manager, do most people get the connection between their water and the forest?
Oh my gosh, that's one of my favorite things. So, we actually have a whole initiative here at SRP called the Healthy Forest Initiative. And we have whole campaigns about how we are trying to make that connection for our customers, about when you turn on your faucet, that water actually came from like hundreds of miles away, and traveled through the mountains and the rivers and the lakes and canals to reach your faucet, and making that deep connection to them that, like, in order to have reliable and sustainable water supplies, you have to protect the forest. You have to make sure that they're not burning down. And so that's one of my favorite campaigns. And in fact, we have a program for our residential customers where they can provide $3 a month on their electric bill, and then SRP matches those funds. And collectively, we take those funds, 100% are invested in on the ground restoration projects every year. And so it's just another way that we can get our customers tied to this topic and to have that collective action.
What are some of the, like, some of your challenges? Is it customer awareness? Is it funding? I mean, you did mention that you guys are socializing some of the funding with some of your partners, but like, talk to me about a handful of things that end up being some roadblocks for your initiatives and what you guys are trying to accomplish as a utility.
Yeah. Funding is one. I would say when the infrastructure bill that came through and the Inflation Reduction Act, it gave record numbers of funding to the U.S. Forest Service, but it's not. It was still. It's never going to be enough for the magnitude of the problem we're dealing with and the longevity of the problem that we have. So those funds were very time stamped, over 5 years to 10 years. And we're talking about problems that are going to take 20 to 30 years to fix. And so that is always kind of a problem, is there enough funding collectively to get the amount of work done? And I would say no, there's never going to be enough money in the system. But I think one of our strategies is to think about how we can be more strategic in utilizing the funds we have to really hit those priority areas first and bring more and more people to the table to help solve this. I always say that this is not a problem that one entity can solve. Like, it's going to take everybody, literally everybody, coming to the table to help solve this problem because of just the sheer magnitude of it. So,
let's say funding was not an issue. Let's say like I granted you every dollar you could ever ask for. What is the problem you are actually trying to solve? Like in its entirety?
I think one of the other big problems is that we have a lack of forest product industry, specifically industry that knows how to or can handle the really small material that comes off of our forest projects. So it's typically called biomass or slash, right? And it's like tops, limbs, needles of trees. And, there's just not really great economical ways to handle that material. And it comes off in massive amounts of volumes. And it's very expensive to handle. And so, I mean, if I could come up with an ideal world, is that we have massive amounts of industry available to take that material, make marketable or commercially available products from it that can be used in other processes. That would be that would make my life a lot easier and make our projects move a lot simpler.
So today, that excess material, right, or that's being shed or that's hanging around, like take us through, paint a picture for what does the world look like today? How is that material being managed? Where is it being moved? What percentage of it is being commercially utilized? What does the world look like at the current moment?
Okay. So if you think about an acre of land here in Arizona that needs to be restored, and this is very general. So we're talking about 1 acre can generate about 40 green tons worth of material. About 20 of that green tons is in log form, and that gets put on log trucks and sent to lumber mills. And then the other 20 tons is really tied to biomass and slash. And so we have a couple industries here in Arizona that take that material. So we have a biomass power plant, of which SRP has a power purchase agreement with. And we send a bunch of material over there. Some of it can get shipped and used for like animal bedding or landscape. That really pretty bark that Home Depot sells, and they
Like
dye
the
it
mulch?
red or brown. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's some of the products that come off of our forest as well. But those industries are not scaled to match what we need to get done. So we need to do, 35,000 acres of thinning. And the biomass industry here really is somewhere around 15 to 20,000 acres of that material they can handle. So we need to diversify our marketplace and also grow it.
Does the state or, have you guys raised this as an issue where the state can create incentives for more biomass facilities? Like what is the solve, and what are you guys doing what are you proposing?
Yeah. So this is actually not a phenomenon, strictly tied to our Arizona or even SRP. This is a Western-wide issue, right? And so there are a lot of things that we have done and moved. So we've tried to create like a healthy forest enterprise tax credit that incentivizes industries to come here and just simply chew through tonnage of materials, and they can take tax credits to do that. We've also renewed our power purchase agreement with the biomass power plant because that was such a central hub for all of the support for all of the other forest product industry. So that's been really helpful. And then we've been working on a lot of nationwide policy type issues to, try to help address this problem, not just for Arizona, but for everybody that's kind of facing the same issue, and trying to create more pathways for this material to flow to. So one of the examples is that there's a program called the Renewable Fuel Standard Program, which allows for biofuels to be mixed with petroleum products. But one of the provisions in that program is that biomass and slash off of federal lands can't be used to create that product and be used for that program. And so that's one of the changes that we would like to see, is just allow from federal lands that are at high risk of wildfire for that material to be able to turn into a biofuel to participate in that program. We think could be a potential pathway.
So again, you seem to be unique, or at least ahead of the pack. Did I read, or maybe you told me, that you received a grant to help others or to build a business case around this concept?
So we received a grant from the U.S. Endowment of Forestry, and that grant was really centered around what we call innovative financing. And so part of the grant was to really scale up a lot of our what we call co-benefit analysis. So, forest thinning has a lot of benefits, but we don't always quantify what those benefits. We know what they are, right? But we don't put numbers to them. And so our team has done a really great job of trying to focus on carbon and water and use modeling techniques to quantify how we are having net positive impacts on the restoration projects. And then when we do that, we can scale our financing because we can bring others to the table. We can get corporates invested by using those quantified impacts. And so that was the first part of that grant. And then the second part is creating these kind of funding strategies for other power and water utilities and showing them different pathways that they can take, so that way if they say I only have maybe $500,000 to put towards restoration, how could you leverage that money against these other different types of programs or, interesting financing mechanisms, so that way your $500,000 now becomes $2 million. And now that you're doing, 2,000 acres as opposed to 500 acres, right? And so that's really what the grant is scaled about. And then taking that information to electric and water utilities to help them get involved.
So Elvy, maybe you can speak a little bit to the legislative side of things, all the initiatives that you're doing, potential legislation that's coming out, a looming election, and how that may impact some of your initiatives, funding, decisions, etc.
Yeah, thank you for that. So one of the beauties about forest restoration is that I think that it's one of those topics that kind of goes over traditional political boundaries, right? We all can agree that we have a wildfire crisis. We can all agree that burning down communities and forest and destroying water supplies and infrastructure is not a future that we all envision or want. And so there is a lot of collective action around targeting this topic and how we can really all work together. And that's one of the things I really love about this, because it doesn't matter if you're in a rural area or you're in an urban city. We all appreciate our forested watersheds and recognize the value that they bring. And I think that there's a lot of consensus about what the problem is and what the solution is. Now, sometimes there's a lot of different paths on how we get to that solution, and I think that's where most of these discussions happen legislatively. And so, for example, there's always been a really big push around streamlining the Forest Service's ability to work with partners to implement long-term contracts, so that way forest product industry has long-term certainty about the wood supply, so that way they can guarantee that they can continue making products, right? And so there's a lot of discussion around some of those issues in the middle of how do we get from the problem to the solution. And I think there's a great coalition and even a bipartisan coalition around this already. And so I think this is one of those topics that can, can get over election humps and leadership changes. And that's one of the reasons why I love working in this space, because it doesn't matter if you live in the mountains or you live here in the concrete jungle, right? We can agree on what needs to get done and figure out the pathway to do so.
Oh, that's great.
Something that transcends politics. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Elvy, thanks again today for making time. I thought this was a very interesting conversation. Let's try and find some time to maybe dig a little deeper on a handful of the topics. The biomass I thought was pretty interesting, and the continued relationship between the forest management and the watershed I think is something that will be a topic that I think other utilities would be very engaged in as well, because we just haven't really had this conversation in that relationship, and I think it's super interesting and very important. So really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, diving into how to work with the Forest Service and, what mechanisms exist to do so, I think is a really important topic that a lot of people sometimes get stuck on. So,
yeah,
it is one that you hear, maybe they haven't all figured it out like you have.
yeah.
There was a lot of trial and error. Let's just say that.
Well, thanks again, and we'll try to schedule something again for the future. But thank you for today.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Elvy, thank you.
That's it for this episode of Trees and Lines, brought to you by Iapetus Holdings. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. If you have any questions or comments on any of our episodes or ideas for topics or guests, we'd love to hear from you. Please contact us at treesandlines@iapetusllc.com. We'll chat with you soon.